You're listening to Innovators, the podcast from Harris Search Associates, where we speak with global leaders in education, research, engineering, and the health sciences, and ask them to share lessons learned as they continue to advance the frontiers of innovation and discovery. Today's podcast will be led by Joanne Fax, Senior Consultant.
Hello, our topic for this edition of Innovators is higher education's place in the STEM pipeline. We are delighted to have as our guest today Dr. Emily Miller, who is the Associate Vice President at the Association of American Universities. Welcome, Dr. Miller.
Thank you.
My first question for you today is as follows. AAU is home to 60 American research-intensive doctoral granting universities and somewhat paradoxically 2 Canadian universities as well, all of which are viewed as among the best higher education institutions in the world. With all that's going on in science, technology, engineering, and math, aka STEM, why is it important for such universities to be involved in a reform effort that addresses primarily undergraduate teaching and learning?
So the AAU institutions are leading institutions, and I think we think about how are we excellent in both research and in teaching. And the National Academies of Science produced a report called Discipline-Based Education Report that documented a large body of literature that said that there are more effective ways to engage students in and help students learn in the STEM fields. And then it really became a question, why aren't these practices employed at our institutions? And there are a lot of institutional and cultural barriers to why it hasn't been adopted to scale, but it was really became no longer acceptable to think that our institutions wouldn't be exceptional in teaching and learning as they are in research. And so we view this very much as an institutional commitment to be thinking about how are they going to fulfilling their institutional missions to ensure that all students who are interested in learning and enrolled in STEM courses are provided with the maximum opportunity to succeed. And so AAU launched in 2011 an initiative with our member campuses, really thinking about how can we support and encourage faculty members in our departments to use these teaching pedagogies and practices that are very beneficial for students. And we've seen evidence of that over the course of our project.
Can you explain a little bit about the initiative?
So the AAU Undergraduate STEM Education Initiative, it began as a 5-year initiative, and it's continuing past the initial 5 years. The initiative has 5 overarching goals. The first goal was to develop a framework with our member campuses, and the framework lays out for systemic improvement of undergraduate STEM teaching and learning. And at the core of the framework are the pedagogies, the teaching practices, and surrounding the core of pedagogy is scaffolding. How do you support faculty members and departments in employing these best practices that we know to be very effective? And then at the institutional level, what's the cultural change? What is the cultural change that's going to need to happen at our institutions for the valuing and the recognition for continuous improvement in undergraduate instruction? So we developed the first goal was to develop a framework, a model for change, you could say, with our member campuses. The second goal of our project was to implement pilot projects that could address a challenge that was localized on their institution, but also work across the framework. And so AAU had the opportunity through grant funds that we had, to pilot 8 pilot projects on campuses that ran for the last 4. They're still running now, but they've been examined for the last 4 years on our campuses. It became very apparent that the AAU membership was very interested in these pilot projects, and half of our member campuses submitted concept papers to be considered one of the 8 pilot projects. So simultaneously, we developed a network of our institutions that was focused on the improvement of undergraduate STEM teaching and learning, and then we fostered and developed that in parallel to these pilot projects going on. It's been exciting to see the future growth of that. We were just received a grant from Northrop Grumman to be able to award mini grants to 24 institutions. So it's really maintaining the momentum. The third goal was to really look at the institutional policy levers around this. And that's very much where we have addressed, focused attention on the promotion and tenure process at our institutions. Faculty members are often highly rewarded for their research productivity. So in a space where we were going to be encouraging improvements to undergraduate education, how is that going to be valued and assessed in the reward structures at our institutions? And so we've collaborated with the Cottrell Scholars, which are physical scientists that are funded from Research Corp heavily in kind of addressing this particular topic, and it's one that AAU has taken on individually as well. But we think it's a critical lever for sustained change. Our fourth goal is looking at federal policies. What federal policies really could help advance this work locally on the campus, and that's where we've given attention to the broader impacts. Within National Science Foundation grants, faculty members need to write into their broader impacts. They need to write in broader impacts, and a means to meet your broader impacts is improvement of your undergraduate teaching. But it's not a highly used mechanism by faculty members across the disciplines. So we've worked to clarify language in federal legislation and with bill justification language, and starting to work with NSF program officers and reviewers on how that can be more an accepted practice within broader impacts on federal grants. And the fifth goal is really how are we examining this work and disseminating our findings to the broader higher education community, knowing some things are relevant to specific to AAU, some to the research intensive community, but there are translations I think that are applicable to all the sectors of higher education. So that's the initiative's 5 goals overarching, and then we've had multiple funded grants that have advanced targeted projects in areas to advance each one of those goals.
Has it been in existence long enough where you can see what things are really working and where you can see some improvement in these areas?
Yes, so we are actually currently writing right now a 5-year status report where we're able to we're putting forth in that some cross-cutting themes that we've seen across institutions and really what has helped advance and move forward an institution. And we've also collected individually from our campuses some really exciting data around the learning gains that have happened and the closure of achievement gaps that have happened on our campuses. So some of the themes that we've seen is, it's become an institutional priority, this work in undergraduate education. There's real alignment between that of the department, the college, and the university. We've seen that institutions are harnessing institutional-wide data to inform discussions in the department around student learning, and that's a growth. We see that as a real strategy that has advanced campuses. When departments have taken ownership of the introductory curriculum and have committed to learning objectives and outcomes and assessments towards them, and that regardless of who's going to teach it, there's a commitment to that curricula, it has been very powerful. And we've also seen some new hiring tracks that are happening within institutions to bring educational leadership to the department and think about how the faculty members support, the innovation in teaching that's happening in the department, and also can work in partnership with faculty. So there's really, that's been something that's catalyzed work on campus. And they're often in these reform efforts, it really addresses some of the institutional systems. So how are the systems being, addressed? You can think about it when learning space has been redesigned. Who has access to that space? How is that space being assigned for classes? Do the faculty members who are getting assigned to that space know how to productively maximize that space? And so we see campuses that are really excelling in this work are addressing some of these key themes in their work. And across all of our campuses.
So it sounds like you're doing a total global review of everything to try and see exactly which pieces are working and which not? Sounds very interesting. I'm going to go back to the faculty piece because that's my next question. You said you were doing some things in terms of getting faculty to be active in STEM work, but there's a perception out there that research, mostly grants, publications, and those things, so the activities that really count toward tenure, promotion, prestige, and other standards, whereas curriculum reform, new pedagogies, and such are seen as secondary. In particular, what sort of leadership is required of department chairs, deans, and provosts to encourage and facilitate faculty members becoming actively involved in STEM efforts when most times their plates are full? You said you did have in your pilot program some initiatives or things to entice and help faculty get more involved, but I'd like to hear from you what those strategies are.
Yes, so it is true that how do you balance both the productivity and research and teaching, and how it has been more greatly skewed towards the research. So we are looking at this greatly, and it's really where practice needs to come in alignment with stated policies. All our institutions have stated policies that value teaching in this in the hiring process, in the annual review, in the promotion tenure or merit review. And it's really the practices and what's the lived experience that's falling short on our campuses. And so department chairs and deans really do have a critical role in how they reinforce expectations to faculty members that they're hiring.
Let's talk about how do you and other leaders in higher education assess progress in STEM? And we've talked a little bit about that. You were very explicit in your explanation of the pilot programs and the 4-year track that you're on, but what are the indicators at which you look to measure advances? What are the particulars?
I think systemic institutional change takes time. Literature will say it takes 7 to 10 years. It's something that I think there needs to be a long-term commitment towards. I think what we're seeing more are these precursors. How is the institution structuring itself, organizing itself? Who are they hiring to bring into the institution to establish themselves to be able to have continuous forward progress? What has helped kind of make this work be continued is, I think, the documentation of how it is really benefiting the students on the campus in the sense of how our students are persisting and being retained in the STEM fields. And as I said, closing of the achievement gaps, lowering of the DFW rates. And, many students enter our institutions aspiring to study STEM, but research has shown that they leave because they cite poor teaching. And I think we are addressing that, and within addressing that and improving the way teaching is happening, the students are engaged more in the subject matter and learning more.
How much does the success of efforts in STEM education depend on improvements in education at the K through 12 levels? And if that not be the case, then what needs to change in the undergraduate educational track to retain more students in the STEM areas? And I know you've spoken a little bit to that, but I'd like you to expound on it, please.
So there's been a heavy investment in the K-12 space to encourage students to be interested in STEM, and there has been work done on the next generation science standards and the approach to teaching science in the K-12 space. And I believe we have many students aspiring to and wanting to study in the STEM fields, and they enter our institutions, and their introductory foundational courses that can have upwards in some of the public's 400-seat lectures, that experience has not been engaging, and it has really dissuaded them from persisting or staying in the STEM fields. So I would say that I think there's been quite a bit of work done at the K-12 level, and it's really about how do we sustain that interest once they arrive at our institutions. And that's where we have really come to say that we need the higher ed institutions need to, it's our responsibility that we help these students be successful. And we need to take ownership in our own teaching practices and how we're supporting these students. I think quite often there were a lot of resources dedicated at institutions in the co-curricular space for students to be successful, and very little was focused within the curriculum and working with the faculty members in the department. So this is to say a lot can be supported in the co-curricular space, but a lot can be undone in the classroom. And so how do we address what's happening in the classroom? All students take these courses, and so or take courses, I should say. And so how do we work with faculty members in departments and really think about supporting our faculty members, encouraging our faculty members to use what research has proven to be some of the most effective means to help students learn their discipline. And so I think if we can be successful in that, we'll be able to maintain kind of the energy and excitement that has been coming from the K-12 space and coming into our institutions.
Do you find that you have problems? Where do the students seem to have a little issue where they may stop out of the STEM curriculum? Is it after the first year, second year? Is it more males than females? Have you been able to study it enough to figure out exactly what causes them not to stay in the STEM areas?
I think a significant issue that has been documented, not by our research, but existing, is mathematics. Mathematical preparation is really a hurdle, because without that prerequisite, then you're not eligible for some of these courses, and then you're in sometimes remedial courses that aren't counting. So mathematics has really been an area where has been is a significant challenge on our campuses, but is being addressed through some of these initiatives. And there's national efforts really looking at the mathematics at our university levels. So mathematics is a real challenge, and is a place that can really decide the trajectory of a student very early on in their career. So how to support them.
My last question for you today is, do you believe we are receiving mixed signals? On one hand, there's visibly more attention paid to and importance attached to STEM education initiatives. But on the other hand, we're increasing competition for smaller pools of dollars to support research in STEM by professors, graduate students, and undergraduates who are focusing in this area.
It's a challenging time, I think, on a variety of fronts. I think that, we do see research funding being reduced. At the same time, I think there's also just a real question, about the science, questioning of science. And so what I would say is the challenge, I think, that sometimes we're talking about is the AAU is having to explain a lot about our research universities. So we're having to explain the basic research that's conducted at our institutions and communicating that in the current national context that we have. And then it's like, well, how do you connect undergraduate education and improvements in that space when you're talking about almost the entire enterprise and what it does? And so I think we think a lot about going back to some of back to history, where we talk about the relationship between our research universities and our federal government, and this partnership that was created, and how do we support in this time that partnership because of the basic research? But we don't want to also lose the sight in our conversation about the value of an undergraduate degree at a research university. And so we're trying to explain both of those, I think, in the current context that we have today. And it's around the value and the importance of the science that's generated at our institutions, and the relationship between the federal government and our research universities, that government university partnership that we've had. At the same time, also explain the real value of undergraduates getting undergraduate degrees at leading research universities and having opportunities to be in those environments.
This has been such an interesting discussion. I wonder if you have any word or two or advice for anybody out there in institutions about how to better approach STEM, what efforts they can do now. What would be those couple things you would like to leave with our audience today?
In one way, AAU schools have 1.2 million undergraduate students per year. That's a significant number of students that you want to do well by. But in the grand portion of all undergraduate education, it's a very small percentage. I would say I do not feel that there is a shortage of interest by faculty members and departments to do the best that they can. And I think we just need to think about how do you support the faculty members and the departments in achieving what they aspire to do. And I think in some way it's like, how does this work become an institutional priority and one that is valued, recognized, and acknowledged within the university system, so that they are encouraged to dedicate time and effort towards and get the support to do it well, to improve the quality of undergraduate education. I don't think there's a lack of desire by a large majority of faculty. It's just how to have the support to engage in doing that work. And so I would encourage institutional leaders to really think about how do they communicate the value and importance of this within their institution.
Okay, well, we want to thank Dr. Emily Miller, Associate Vice President for Policy at the Association of American Universities, for being with us today and talking about our topic on the STEM pipeline and higher education's role in this arena. We thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to much success to your organization and to you as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Innovators, a production of Harris Search Associates. We'll have more insightful conversations with global thought leaders to follow.